Thank you, Mr. President. I would, first of all, like to thank Chairman Levin and Ranking Member McCain for their work on this National Defense Authorization Bill. And tonight I'll speak to an amendment that I filed. I won't call it up for now. I just want to speak to it. But this is a critically important debate for the country, and I know they've worked very hard, and I've had the honor and the pleasure to work with Senator Levin on a number of measures over the years. And one of the real concerns that we all have is what's happening to our troops as it relates to IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. And it's been central to the work that many of us have done, my work as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and of course Chairman Levin and so many others working on this for a long time. And it does have a daily impact, obviously, on our troops and on their families. Often the best words about our soldiers and about war itself come from Lincoln, when he talked about those who lose their life in battle, those who gave, as he said, the last full measure of devotion to their country. But he also talked about those who serve and are wounded and come back. And his words to describe those soldiers when he spoke of him who has borne the battle. And I think about those words when I consider those who have borne the battle and come back with not just injuries, but with grievous injuries, and sometimes almost irreparable harm that's done to them because of the explosion that they lived through with an IED. I was in Bethesda Naval Hospital not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it's one of the real privileges of serving in the United States Senate that you're given the opportunity to meet so many brave young men and women who serve, those who serve and are never hurt, those who serve and are wounded, and of course, unfortunately, you meet the families of those who lose their life in battle. But I was in Bethesda's Naval Hospital, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, and I walked into the room of a soldier who had been injured and was recovering there, and his parents were there and his brother was there, and we're in the room, and you're always worried about staying too long because you feel like you're almost intruding. But for some reason that night I didn't feel that I was intruding, because he wanted to talk, and he wanted to talk about his service. He wanted to talk about his love for his country, how he was injured, but he also talked about the future, what he wanted to do when he would leave that hospital bed. And it was a stunning moment for me to be talking to a soldier who's looking up from his hospital bed, and the optimism that he displayed about his future, the calm within which he could, or with which he could speak about his service, was really, to me, stunning. He talked as if he were just recovering from a minor injury. And halfway through my visit, I almost had to remind myself the injuries that he was suffering from. He had both legs blown off below the knee from an IED blast. But despite that, despite the horror of it, despite the damage done to his body, a 20-year-old soldier, he was talking about the future, what he was going to do when he left that hospital, and he's talking about his service. So when we see soldiers like that, I think it inspires us all the more and really compels us to do more when it comes to protecting our troops against the scourge of IEDs. And we know, and so many people here know, that they're the top killer of our troops in Afghanistan. The primary ingredient in IEDs found in Regional Command South in Afghanistan, where the presiding officer and I were in August, is a fertilizer called calcium ammonium nitrate, known by the acronym CAN. It's banned in Afghanistan, but unfortunately it's produced in just a few factories in Pakistan. But just a small percentage of what's produced in Pakistan finds its way into Afghanistan and becomes the main ingredient in the IEDs. Most of the calcium ammonium nitrate used in IEDs unfortunately comes from Pakistan. Over the past 2 years, I've led an effort to urge Pakistan to do more to address this threat. I've sent letters, we passed a resolution here in the Senate, and I traveled to Afghanistan and Pakistan last August to make the case directly to the leaders in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. And as I mentioned, the presiding officer, Senator Bennett, along with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut and Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island, traveled with us. And we spent a good deal of time in Pakistan, 3 days. And we were, I think, pretty consistent in the delivery of that message, that we were not just urging, but we were providing, I think, a sense of urgency, but almost a directive as best we could, urging and pushing their government as hard as we could to help us, and to help themselves, by the way. A lot of Pakistanis lose their life this way as well. So during these meetings, Senator Bennett, Senator Blumenthal, and Senator Whitehouse and I, we heard good things, that the Pakistani government had developed a plan, a strategy to deal with this, a plan to tighten their borders, a plan to regulate the sale of calcium ammonium nitrate and other IED precursor materials, and a plan which included conducting a public relations campaign to sensitize the Pakistani people to the dangers posed by these materials. This political commitment was encouraging, but given the ongoing and increasing threat to our troops, we needed to maintain a sense of urgency about it. And I think we owe our troops nothing less than that sense of urgency on this issue. During our meetings in Islamabad, we also discussed the serious threat that IEDs pose to the Pakistani people, as I mentioned a moment ago. Some, or more than, I should say, 500 Pakistanis have been killed by IEDs since the beginning of this calendar year. This is a common threat that requires a common solution. This is something we can and should work together on. And it's no secret that the relationship between the United States and Pakistan is not a good relationship right now. It is, to say something which is a vast understatement, it has soured dramatically. There's an awful lot of tension and mistrust and a real breakdown in this relationship. One of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways that we can build some confidence that we can begin to work together on a common threat is for the Pakistani government to take action, to take concerted action on the question of IEDs. I do want to commend and thank those 3 senators that I mentioned who were on the trip with me. Senator Bennett of Colorado, the presiding officer, was there for every meeting and worked very hard with us. Senator Whitehouse as well from Rhode Island. Senator Blumenthal was with us, and he spoke, I know today, I didn't see his speech today, his remarks on the floor, but my staff told me about them, and I want to thank him for those words today, and for his and Senator Bennett and Senator Whitehouse's dedication to this issue and the work that they've done during our trip in August and since that trip. And I'm proud to join with them on this effort today and every day we've been working on it. I also want to thank Senator Barrasso from Wyoming for his leadership and willingness to work with us on this amendment with Senator Bennett, Senator Whitehouse, and Senator Blumenthal. This is a critical issue for our troops and for their families. And I think it was so important that we delivered and continue to deliver a strong bipartisan message to the Pakistani government, to any official in their government that has anything to do with this issue. During our trip, the message we delivered, and thereafter. And I think we can deliver another message by way of this amendment on this bill. This amendment would hold Pakistan to its commitments, the commitments it already made to its strategic plan to counter IEDs. Mr. President, as you know well, IEDs are killing and injuring our troops at a terribly alarming rate. And while we can never completely eradicate the component parts of IEDs, we can make life difficult for the bomb maker if we pass this amendment. We should recommit ourselves to this important mission and redouble our efforts to limit the availability of these component parts on the battlefield. And again, we owe nothing less than that to our troops. Often I have said that when we talk about the commitment and the sacrifice of our troops, we also talk about praying for them. And we all do that. And thank goodness the American people pray on a regular basis for our troops. But I think we should also, once in a while, pray for ourselves that we may be worthy of the valor of our troops. And there aren't a lot of ways to prove yourself worthy of the valor of our troops. One way that members of the United States Senate and House can prove ourselves worthy of that valor is to pass amendments like this amendment, to force as best we can officials in Pakistan to do the right thing for our troops, for their families, and for our country, but also to do the right thing for their own people, people who live in Pakistan threatened every day by IEDs. So, Mr. President, I'll conclude just by saying that we have an opportunity to prove ourselves worthy of the valor of our troops, and passing this amendment is one such way to do that. I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I would ask consent to set aside the pending amendment.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would just very simply call up three amendments. The first amendment is amendment number 1215. The second is amendment number 1139, 1139, and then also the third one is 1140.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
Senator from Pennsylvania, Mr. Casey, proposes amendments number 1215, 1139, and 1140.
And I would ask consent to set those three amendments aside.
Without objection.
I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that on Thursday, November 17th, Senator Bennett be authorized to sign duly enrolled bills or joint resolutions.
Without objection.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask for the regular order on the Levin McCain amendment.
The amendment is the regular order. It is now pending.
I thank the presiding officer. Now I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendments, I withdraw that, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to calendar number 232, H.R. 1059.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 232, H.R. 1059, an act to protect the safety of judges by extending the authority of the Judicial Conference and so forth and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate proceeds to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that committee reported amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any related statements be printed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent now that the Banking Committee be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 2056.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate proceeds to the measure. The clerk will report.
H.R. 2056, an act to instruct the Inspector General of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to study the impact of insured depository institution failures and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Levin amendment at the desk be agreed to, the bill as amended be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table, and that any statements relating to the bill appear at this point in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent now that the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 221, H.R. 3321.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 221, H.R. 3321, an act to facilitate the hosting in the United States of the 34th America's Cup by authorizing certain eligible vessels to participate in activities related to the competition and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate proceeds to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that a Feinstein substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to. The bill as amended be read a third time and passed. The motions to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any statements related to the bill be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 53, S99.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 53, S99, a bill to promote the production of molybdenum-99 and so forth and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate proceeds to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment be considered. The Bingaman amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to. The committee reported amendment as amended be agreed to, and the bill as amended be read a third time, and the budgetary pay-go statement at the desk be read.
The clerk will read the statement.
Senator from North Dakota, Mr. Conrad, this is the statement of budgetary effects of pay-go legislation for S99 as amended. Total budgetary effects of S99 for the 5-year statutory pay-go scorecard, $0. Total budgetary effects of S99 for the 10-year statutory pay-go scorecard, $0. Also submitted for the record as part of this statement is a table prepared for the Congressional Budget Office, which provides additional information.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the bill be passed, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate, and any related statements be printed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S.Res. 332, which was submitted earlier today by Senator Hagan.
The clerk will report.
S.Res. 332, a resolution supporting the goals and ideals of American Education Week.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate, and that any statements relating to the measure be printed in the record at the appropriate place.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-Res 333, which was submitted earlier today by Senator Feinstein.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 333, welcoming and commending the government of Japan for extending an official apology to the United States former prisoners of war from the Pacific War and establishing in 2010 a visitation program to Japan for surviving veterans, family members, and descendants.
Without objection, the Senate proceeds to the measure.
I ask, Mr. President, the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate, and that any statements relating to the measure be printed in the record at the appropriate place.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, the Senate adjourn until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Friday, November 18, 2011, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, that following any leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of S. 1867, the Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
We'll continue to debate the Defense Authorization Bill tomorrow, and if senators want to offer amendments, they should come to the floor tomorrow. There will be no votes tomorrow. The next vote will be around 5:30 p.m. on Monday, November 28th. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today approved a measure to fund the government through mid-December. The House approved the same bill earlier today. In the Senate, work continued on